Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another session of the European Humanitarian Forum. This session is titled, The Challenges of Humanitarian Negotiations and Principled Response. How far are you ready to go to save lives? The case of Yemen. If you want to join us on Twitter, please use hashtag EHF2023. Unfortunately, interpretation due to technical reasons will not be available this time. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Ali El-Jabri. I'm a senior moderator and studio presenter with Pro Moderation. I'm a former TV correspondent for Associated Press and a war reporter for Dutch language newspapers Trouw and De Standaard. I've also lectured in international relations and international political economy at The Hague University. It's a great pleasure to be with you, and I look forward to learning from your input. The focus of this session is as follows. The war in Yemen has been ongoing for 8 years. While there is hope for a political settlement, over 21 million Yemenis, that's 2/3 of the population, are in need of aid. The situation is a priority to the EU, who have recently committed another 136 million euros to humanitarian aid in the country. However, Yemen has proved highly inaccessible, with over 3,300 cases of access issues reported by humanitarian agencies in 2022 alone. In this session, we ask, how do we improve the operating environment in Yemen to allow for safe and unhindered humanitarian access? How can we reinforce unity within the humanitarian community in negotiating access and maintaining a principled approach? Maybe you read today that the main parties to the conflict agreed on a prisoner swap that involved 900 people. Let's hope that's a prelude for better times. Before I introduce the members of the panel to you, let us look at this video. Allow me to introduce to you the members of the panel, but first I ask them to take their seats. I will start to introduce them to you by starting from the other extreme. Mr. Karl Skau is the Deputy Director General and Head of Department for Multilateral Partnership at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Sweden. He's also co-chair of the Senior Officials Meeting, SOM, dealing with humanitarian aid in Yemen. Sitting next to me is Ms. Maya Ameratunga, who is UNHCR representative in Yemen. Thanks for joining us. The final speaker, whom I haven't introduced to you on stage, is Marcia Montemuro, who represents here Geneva. And we have a speaker joining us online from Sana'a. Let me see if we can have her up. There she is, Ms. Fatima Sharafuddin. She is Gender-Based Violence Area of Responsibility Coordinator for the Yemen Women Union. Thanks a lot for making the time to join us, to the four of you. Maybe you'd like an applause to kick off? The setup of the session is very simple. I have 2 questions for each of the speakers. I've kindly asked them, and they have agreed, and I'm very grateful, that the first answer will be 4 minutes at most, the second answer will be 3 minutes at most. And that is in the interest of making sure that each one of you, the speakers, has their fair share of time to contribute, and that we have some space for interaction with the room. Let me start by asking you, Marcia. Your organization has published a very interesting report on principled assistance in Yemen. Could I ask you to highlight the key challenges that you've considered, as well as some of the key solutions? I think it should be on already. Excellent.
Yes, can you hear me? Hi, thank you. I think we should have probably tested the mics with me before. Thank you so much, first of all, to ECHO and Sweden for having me here today. And I think it's really interesting to continue the conversation that we started already last year with regard to the research that we did. It was a piece of research that really looked at principal humanitarian programming in Yemen. So some of the challenges that humanitarian actors have been facing in implementing a principal humanitarian response. I want to start from the title of the report, because that, in a way, sums some of the challenges that we have seen. And the title of the report is is it a prisoner's dilemma, ? Why did we come up with that title? Because the title leads already to the question of incentives and the question of outcomes that are in the interest of individuals as a group. And that's where we realized that, I don't know whether many of you are familiar with this popular image in game theory, that was a really apt image to take into account. Because basically there are a number of incentives, and there were at the time we did that research, that push decision makers to make decisions on the basis of what they could see as individual organizations, without necessarily realizing what could be the better outcomes as a group. Access challenges have also created an environment where humanitarian actors tend to be pitted one against another, and they're confronted with very, very difficult dilemmas, both ethical and very much linked to humanitarian principles. I think the first that we saw in terms of the challenges was even with the simple principle of humanity. I think as humanitarian actors, we tend to take the principle of humanity for granted. We understand that by being present in any context, we are already upholding our principle of humanity. And I think what we saw in Yemen was that that couldn't be taken for granted either. So there was a very, there were a number of questions in relation to coverage in terms of how actors were in proximity with affected populations. And then the other element that was really, we highlighted as a challenge was the trade-off between the principle of independence and the principle of impartiality. So the question of how are we able as humanitarian actors to reach those most in need was really had to be balanced by humanitarian actors with the question of what degree of independence do we allow in our decision making. And in this particular context was really, for example, one of the bigger questions was related to beneficiary lists. Who do we include in our targeting? Some of the solutions, I think, one is really, and be happy to, I see my 4 minutes are up, happy to elaborate further, but very much being able to continue building on this question of trust. So the image of the prisoner's dilemma is the fact that there's a lack of communication between the prisoners. And some of the outcomes can be improved by pure and simple communication. And so being able to find informal channels for communication, some of you may know, but in Yemen, there used to be eco-barbecues, maybe they're gonna be again. The idea of having formal gatherings where there is an opportunity to really address some of the challenges that are common to everyone. And then second is really some of the solutions that we highlighted is the idea of thinking about documenting, at least internally, some of the decisions that are made in terms of compromises, in terms of understanding the trade-offs and the decisions that are made based on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Indeed, in a prisoner's dilemma, the individual incentives lead to collectively undesirable outcomes, and the only solution is communication and coordination, and we'll touch on that quite elaborately in this discussion. Moving on to Maya, you are leading one of the organizations that is constantly negotiating access to people in need. How do you approach access negotiations, and what are the challenges in maintaining a principled approach?
Well, access negotiations in Yemen indeed can be a tough call. It has its ups and downs, and unfortunately right now we are going through a period where there are serious challenges to humanitarian access. And those who stay and deliver inside Yemen, I must say, have to be courageous and tenacious to stand up for the principles on a daily basis. I'm speaking here not only on behalf of an agency, but actually as also the cluster lead for protection and shelter and camp coordination, camp management. And especially as a protection agency, it's really important that we are able to stand up for principles, protection principles, such as do no harm, inclusive approaches, non-discrimination to ensure that marginalized groups are addressed, gender sensitivity, culturally appropriate means of addressing the needs of women and children, and engaging with affected communities, targeting those most in need, and promoting their dignity. And it's not easy, I must say, being a protection actor in Yemen, or indeed having to stand up for the whole protection sector. And because it's hard, it's all the more reason why we have to do it. We have to stand up for centrality of protection and ensure that there are protection outcomes to everything that we serve. Humanitarian principles are benchmarks for all of our work, and even where we have to make compromises, they serve as a vital tool in guiding us. And access is not only geographical access, of course, it's also the inclusive access to all segments of populations, and especially the most vulnerable, the excluded, the marginalized. Last year we had a truce, and what we saw was that geographical access expanded somewhat, but ironically, our access to marginalized populations decreased because of the restrictions on the humanitarian community. So it's really important to understand what humanitarian principles mean in the Yemen context, including in terms of cultural sensitivity. Because these things are not clear, they're open to interpretation. We're dealing with multiple government and authorities in a contested political environment. So meaningful progress means improving our relationships with each actor. And we can attract criticism because of that from one party or the other, or their politically aligned supporters, which actually can be also donors. Mm-hmm. And we have to maintain our neutrality in all of this. I'd just like to give you a quick example of a humanitarian negotiation involving access to refugees. And that was where 3 months after I had arrived in Yemen as representative, we were blocked in every aspect of the refugee program. And finally, I had to go to our highest level ministerial interlocutor and say that we had to be honest about the situation. If we were unable to make progress, we should say so. And we should tell our donors as well that we were unable to achieve objectives. And as a result of that very honest and open conversation, our interlocutor took his responsibilities seriously, convened meetings with a range of actors, and we were able to unblock the situation. So it showed many things, including the fact that where institutions are weak, as they are in Yemen, individuals can be powerful, and we need to tap into that power for people to act as forces for good. And we have to put our money where our mouth is. If we are able to make progress, we should support these programs. And conversely, if we are not able to make progress, then maybe we should think about the impact on funding as well. So experience has shown that if we are open amongst ourselves in communicating about these kinds of challenges, we can address these issues.
Excellent, thank you so much. Fatima, are you able to hear us?
Yes.
Excellent.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Local organizations like yours are the main responders in the field, Fatima. Could you tell us about your participation in the global humanitarian system and some of the key challenges that you face as a local organization?
Yes. Actually, as you know that as a national actor in the humanitarian system, we play a critical role in responding to disaster and crisis in our own country. We have a deep understanding of the local contexts, culture, and even the language, which enable us to respond quickly and effectively to the needs of the affected communities. Additionally, we have existing relationship with the key stakeholders, including government authorities, local leaders, and even community organizations, which allow us to coordinate our response efforts more efficiently. However, despite our important role in the humanitarian system, we often face significant challenges in our work. One of the main challenges is funding. As a local organization, we may not have the same access to funding as a large international organization, which limit our ability to respond to crisis at scale. This can be particularly challenging when responding to particular crisis, where sustained funding is necessary to address ongoing needs. This lack of access, like limit resource, leave local organizations struggling to meet the needs of survivors and even to support frontline responders. For example, supporting women and girls to intervene during, for example, a disaster or such have like heavy rain or flood. Also supporting women during sudden displacement due to the conflict, and also to medical intervention for some sensitive cases. Insufficient funding leaves local organizations unable to scale up programming, which is essentially in order to meet the demand for services and effectively address GBV. So another challenge is access to information and also to resources. International organizations often have more resources and access to information than local organizations, which can make it difficult for us to effectively plan and implement our response efforts. So this limited resource have an impact on the availability of support services for survivors of GBV, such as medical, psychological support, or even legal support. For example, in our organization, economy empowerment, considered as a cross-cutting issue, include all my organization intervention through supporting the beneficiaries with a set of tools need to utilize the skills. Finally, despite these challenges, we remain committed to our works as a national actor in the humanitarian system. We believe that our unique perspective and understanding of the local context allow us to make meaningful difference in the lives of affected communities. We will continue to advocate for greater recognition and support for local organizations in the humanitarian system. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fatima, and thanks for keeping it concise. We'll move from the local level to the level of donors. To your country, Sweden, Carl, Yemen is a priority. Can you tell us, from the perspective of a donor, what are the main challenges and what are you trying to do about it?
Well, thank you, and first thanks to everyone in the audience as well. It's quite impressive and humbling, frankly, to see all this interest in Yemen. It's something that we very much welcome, of course. I mean, we're engaged in at different levels politically to try to see a political solution to this terrible conflict. And as you mentioned in your introduction, hopefully the dynamics that we've seen over the past couple of weeks will, provide an opportunity, a window of opportunity for that. But we've also been engaged as a donor together with Switzerland, hosting a donor conference to mobilize attention and support for Yemen. We've done that, I think, since 2017. We did one about a month ago where we mobilized some 1.2 billion. I hope, frankly, it's the last donor conference for humanitarian assistance that we do, but that the next conference will be one to mobilize for peace. But in parallel to that, together with ECHO, what we've also launched is a process of trying to coordinate common messages together with the main humanitarian actors, the international NGOs, the local NGOs, the UN family, and the main donors, to make sure that we speak with one voice in terms of pushing back on the obstacles we see. You asked about the main challenges, and I mean, there are various, and it depends on, the different regions. In some parts, it's security. In others, it's bureaucratic impediments, like, for example, taxation, or other measures, like, for example, these approvals of subcontracts that takes forever, or other issues that arise and that makes the operating environment complicated. But what we have seen is that when we speak with one voice and when we give attention and when we engage also with the actors on the ground, there can be progress. For example, when we pulled together the first meeting, I think it was back in 2019, of this senior officials group, it was the issue of the levies. The Houthis had put levies on humanitarian assistance. We found that completely unacceptable. And so we pulled together the donors and the actors. We came up with one line. The 7 asks, as we called it at the time, was a list of demands. And there was movement. The levies were taken off. and humanitarian assistance could continue in the way that it should be delivered. And so I guess there are many challenges, and when one go away, there is a new one. And frankly, also, we are concerned about the security environment, not least in the south. But I think, it has given us also some comfort to see that when we come together, speak with one voice, and engage, that we also can see progress.
Excellent response. Thank you so much, Carl, and thanks for being spot on time-wise. Let's move to the second round of questions, starting this time with our guest in Sana'a. Fatima, you're with us again?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Could you share with us what, according to you, local organizations need from the international community in order to deliver aid better? And what are some of the blind spots that international donors might have with regards to your support?
Okay, actually, there are several things that local organizations need from the international community in order to effectively deliver aid. First, for example, access to funding. Local organizations often have limited access to funding, which can restrict our ability to respond to crisis at scale. Donor can provide flexible funding that support local organizations and allow us to respond quickly to emergency. And also technical expert and resources. Local organizations may need advocate, technical expert and resource need to effectively deliver aid. International organizations can provide training, mentoring, and even technical support to local organizations, and helping to build or even strengthen our capacity to improve the quality of our programs. Another point is the partnership and coordination. International organizations can partner with the local organization and work in coordination with us to ensure that it is delivered in a complementary and efficient manner. This includes sharing information, resources, as well as coordinating response effort to avoid duplication of the efforts. Recognition and also representation. Local organizations need to be recognized and represented in decision-making process within the humanitarian system. This includes ensuring that local organizations are included in coordination mechanisms, such as cluster meeting, and that our voices are heard in the development of humanitarian strategy and policies. There are several challenges that are particularly for local organizations that required more attention from donors and also other humanitarian actors, like limit access to funding. As mentioned previously, local organizations often have limited access to funding, which can restrict our ability to respond to crisis at scale. Also, security risks. Local organizations may be more vulnerable to security risks in certain contexts, which can limit our ability to operate safely and effectively. Donor and other humanitarian actors can provide support, resources to help local organizations mitigate security risk. Recognition and representation. Local organizations often face challenges in being recognized, represented in decision-making process within the humanitarian system. Donor often, other humanitarian actor and even donor can work to ensure that local organizations are included in coordination mechanism. Overall, greater recognition and support for local organizations within the humanitarian system is critical to ensure effective and efficient delivery of aid to affected communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fatima. Coincidentally, we have a representative of the international donor community, which is Carl. Carl, could I ask you to respond to some of the points that Fatima raised? Could I also ask you to reflect a little more on the challenges that lie ahead in Yemen while you try to maintain a principled approach?
Well, I think, Fatima makes all the right. Fatima makes all the right points, and we are indeed looking what more can be done for the localization agenda. The pooled funding mechanism is certainly one vehicle for that, and we are engaging with our partners, including the UN, to see what more they can do in order to put pressure and provide incentives for taking the risks, frankly, necessary to invest more in the localization agenda. I mean, you asked about the challenges ahead and what we can do to respond to them. And I mean, I outlined some in my first response, but I also, I think right now it's, of course, the Mahram issue, not least in the north. That's something we're watching closely, and what more can be done on that. I think also the issue of interference with needs assessment is serious obstacles. So those would be maybe my two most current concerns. But in terms of approach of confronting this, one really is engagement. I mean, I've made a couple of visits. My colleagues travel regularly to both Aden and to Sana'a. I know there is, this is the delicate issue. There are sensitivities. We don't want to give undue recognition to the de facto authorities in the north. But at the same time, we've seen that that has paid off. We know that that delivers. And so I would just encourage colleagues to try to find ways also to engage, including at the higher level, to push the UN, the NGOs, the organizations on the ground really needs us as well to complement their efforts to step up in that engagement. A second would be to, again, as I said in my first intervention, to speak with one voice. Really, I think the 7 As that we came around a few years ago was a good kind of one message. It might now need to be updated somewhat, but I think that has really made a difference again. So engagement, speaking with one voice. And if I'd add a third, it's flexible funding. I mean, we need to trust organizations on the ground to really, deliver on the opportunities they see. And everyone I meet in the field speak to the importance of flexible funding, especially working in these difficult operating environments, because then you need to be flexible from moving. When the door closes in one space, you need to be flexible to move into the other. So I think those would be my 3 kind of responses to how to face some of these challenges: engagement, presence, speaking with one voice, and providing flexible funding. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl. Moving on to Maya again. You've touched on the issue of access already. Could I ask you to share with us what other challenges do humanitarian actors face in Yemen? Perhaps you could also touch on the issue of the Mahram that was referred to by Carl.
Well, OCHA analysis shows that 70% of impediments are in the area of bureaucratic and administrative impediments, and a further 10% relate to interference by authorities. So it's only 20% that accounts for security challenges. Carl has touched on a number of them: the issues of delayed sub-agreements, which delays salaries and incentives, pressures to engage certain NGOs, visa delays, denials, needs assessments so that we don't have updated countrywide data, prohibitions on asking certain questions, engaging with communities, independent verification need for beneficiary lists that are imposed by authorities. So there are various number of them. You asked about the Mahram requirements, and this is indeed a serious concern in terms of the humanitarian community's ability to engage with the female half of the communities that we serve. And what we find is that sometimes localized solutions are possible depending on the understanding of authorities. But what we have seen is a deterioration in the situation in the past year. Now, what do the authorities say about this to justify Mahram? They say it's not an issue of discrimination, but rather it reflects culture and religion. It protects women, and it is also important for gaining community acceptance. What do our national staff say about it? They say that culture is relative, and religion can be open to interpretation. They object to being targeted as humanitarian workers with measures that don't apply to the general community, but may spread to the general community. And they say that special requirements for women should be their choice and that of their families, but not of the state. Now, as a member of the humanitarian community, I can say that out of respect for local culture and values and norms, our goal is to deliver humanitarian assistance in a culturally appropriate manner, and that's why we need female staff to engage with female community members. And we are really hoping that the engagement of the humanitarian community with authorities can provide middle ground solutions with flexibility and pragmatism. I think also in terms of what more we can be doing on the issue, we really need to encourage authorities to fulfill their responsibilities as the primary duty bearer, because humanitarians and donors, we don't replace a weak state. Secondly, as Carl was saying, we need to continue to act together, humanitarians and donors, in terms of really good coordination and messaging. But I do think there have been a number of measures that have been carried out in the last year that equips us much better to tackle these kinds of challenges. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Marcia, we've heard the word coordination, unified approach, communication amongst humanitarian actors. Can you tell us, also based on the study that you've done, what can the international humanitarian community do concretely in order to achieve these ends?
Yes, and it's quite interesting to indeed see the idea of the one voice, the idea of the engagement, because it's really exactly what came out of our research. I think the first element, especially when we talk about principled humanitarian response, what we noticed is the need to kind of depolarize the conversation about principles. It's really going back to what Maya was saying in terms of, the interpretation, the fact that religion can be interpreted. I think the question around principles is the fact that there are ideals, they're not rules, so they need to be operationalized. And that operationalization, if it happens individually, may lead to very different decisions from individual organizations, which may lack coherence. And so that has a specific impact on the lack of one voice that Cara was mentioning. And so I think first, both in terms of the, let's say, the humanitarian actors, the donors, it's really this idea of a shift in terms of how we see principles. They're not rules because they're not dictating concretely how to do certain things in Yemen, but they're really ideals to strive for, and they need to be operationalized collectively. And that's where coordination comes in. And I think, as Maya was saying, I understand a number of steps have been taken in recent months to also streamline a little bit more the coordination mechanisms. At the time of the research, many of the coordination bodies were really not that effective. They were too crowded. It was really hard to really have strategic discussions beyond information sharing. And that's when it comes to, debating certain decisions and how to respond to certain requests. That's where coordination comes in, but you need to have coordination mechanisms that are set up for that. And so I think that's definitely one.
Let me come in quickly here and just try to better understand this idea of their principles, not rules. So Carl told us already about the taxes that were levied by the de facto authority, and the international community at that point decided we're not playing ball. We're not going to help if there are taxes. Couldn't that simply become a rule that can be generally, globally applied? When you want taxes, we're not helping, period.
That's the whole concept that we see in terms of red lines. And that's where I see, for example, the SOM was really helpful in terms of coming to this idea of the 7 benchmarks, in terms of coming to that collective agreement. I think when it comes to principles, the principles can lead to red lines if it's really something around understanding how, for example, we can be neutral and independent to achieve reaching those most in need across the country as much as we can. So I think the rules may be deriving from the principles, but the principles per se are not rules as such. And we've seen that when they become rules, they may lead to an opposite effect. So if donors, for example, set them as rules, what we've seen is that organizations are not ready to be open and transparent about the compromises they may be required to make to adhere to the rules that are set forth by donors.
Thank you very much, Marcia. Let us thank the panel for their excellent contributions so far. I'll now turn to the room and see if there are comments and questions. Raise your hand and we'll try to reach you with a microphone ASAP. There's a hand going up here.
Thank you very much for the very interesting interventions. My name is Erin. I'm the country director for the Norwegian Refugee Council in Yemen. One of the topics that many of you have come back to is coordination, information sharing. And we find in Yemen that this is in practice much more difficult than it is to say. Marzia, as you said, quite often it's very difficult to get people to really share what compromises they're making, and it's very difficult to actually put that on the table, even amongst ourselves. And so what we find very often is that the authorities know what we're doing much better than we know what we're doing ourselves, because they have that information about our compromises that we're not willing to sometimes share with each other. So I'm interested to hear from the panel what would be your recommendations, very concretely, for how we build that trust and create that space that allows us to have a much clearer, transparent information sharing to have a coordinated response together. Thank you.
Maybe we start with the academic perspective from Marzia and then talk to someone who's experienced this.
Great, thanks, Erin. Thanks for that question. It is the key, indeed, how to build that trust. And I think you have many different options, potentially. In some cases, something that we thought could work, to be seen, how to be implemented, is sometimes, for example, shared training opportunities for incoming staff. So the opportunity to see this as, somewhere, a forum where you're not supposed to know the answer, but where you're challenged in terms of how you would actually respond when you're confronted with dilemmas. And that enables the community to rely on personal relationships that can be helpful in terms of then building trust and potentially reach out to, to kind of have an opportunity to share experiences. In some cases, and I think that's also what we've seen, is there may be relationships between you and NGOs that are merely in terms of implementing partner relationships, and so they get discussed in terms of specifically programmatic outcomes. And so that's a missed opportunity. That's we saw specifically with the research, where during the workshop for the research findings, it was the first time where one UN agency and their implementing partners were actually having the opportunity to discuss broader issues as opposed to some of the programmatic results. So that would be two of the main points that I would like to highlight.
Excellent. Maya.
Erin, you're right. I mean, too often, I think, within Yemen, we allow ourselves to be divided and ruled upon, and there's not enough communication, but I think that's changing. Right now, we are working on joint operating principles, which reflect principles that the entire humanitarian community should be reflecting in their work. And there are important strategic discussions taking place at the HCT, and I think the level of strategic discussions is actually changing. It is improving. And we're also seeing changes like, for example, stronger protection capacity, stronger protection cluster, a senior advisor to the HCT, different strategies on community engagement, access, and so on. And it really helps as well in the international arena to balance the kind of local negotiations that are taking place with the SOM meetings and the technical monitoring group meetings and so on, which shine an international spotlight and really help us who are within the humanitarian community. And it was really good to see at the Yemen Pledging Conference a much stronger protection narrative as well coming, and that helps us actually with the negotiations with actors. So I think let's continue to work closely together in the humanitarian community in Yemen in terms of sharing all our challenges, because they are common to us, and find a collective way forward, because together we are stronger in reflecting principles than we would be as individual agencies.
Well, I think, coordination is a challenge in Yemen, also partly because some are present in Sana'a, some in Aden, or at least they have different headquarters. I don't think any donors are present in Sana'a. I don't know if any are in Aden, and they're either based in Riyadh or in Amman, so it's a bit all over the place. So I see that there is certainly a challenge, because normally my response to that would have been saying that, it's really at the country level that you do the best coordination, no doubt. But I think on Yemen, yes, we need to be creative and find different platforms and spaces. But of course, this is the job of OCHA, they are the Office of Coordination, but also the cluster leads in the different thematic sections. So I would be looking to them to provide that creative leadership in bringing us together. And we will certainly, with ECHO, continue to do at the kind of headquarters level coordination, at least at an annual basis. But that, of course, can never replace the day-to-day engagement that you have at the country level. But I indeed see that the challenge, if nothing for just a physical lack of physical presence. But I would again just underline the importance of that, just not to fall into the trap of divide and rule, as you say, but really to be able to stick together and have joint sets of principles and messages.
Thanks a lot. Yes.
Hi, my name is Lynn Jansson. I work with civil society support at the EU delegation to Yemen, based in Amman. Carl, I like what you said about taking creative leadership despite lacking presence in the country for working better together. So my question is somewhat related. I wonder, you have also mentioned several struggles with aligning with local power stakeholders, local authorities in different localities in Yemen, which is, of course, a very diverse country. And from the EU side, I work with development cooperation and not humanitarian support primarily, although many of our partners are working within both of these fields. However, the European Union and other donors do not often have very close interactions with local authorities in Yemen. And there are both positive and negative sides of this. Local organizations might not want to be too closely affiliated with international actors like us, although it can also be positive to show the strength in our partnerships and our complementarity. So what is the panel's take on this? How do you think that we can ameliorate cooperation with local authorities in Yemen? And who should have which role?
Thanks for that excellent question. Fatima, were you able to follow that question?
Yes.
That is how to organize better interaction and cooperation between such entities as the EU and local organizations. What is your take on that?
So I'll tell you from my experience as a GBB co-coordinator, I noticed that recently when I start to keep the authorities, even the South and North, close to us, for example, they start to attend our meeting, we start to keep them close coordination and inform them that how to support our partners, member, and so on. I noticed that we start to build trust between authorities and even local organization and other partners. So I think very important to focus that we have to engage authorities in our meetings and even to build capacity for the authorities. This is really important that we have to focus on the capacity building for the authorities, even South and North. Over.
Thank you very much. There's a question here. Could we have a microphone to this end of the room? Meanwhile, Carl, do you wish to respond to that question?
Yeah, no, but I mean, as I said, I think, I really hope we'll have peace soon so that we can engage in a very different way, because it is indeed a challenge right now to deliver on what you just pointed to. I mean, there is no doubt that, the recognized government is our entry point. That's our relationship when it comes to Yemen. But in the south, it is a challenge due to fragmentation to work with the national authorities. And the north, of course, we don't do that because we don't recognize them. So, I wish that we are soon in a different place where we, in a different way, can engage in what would be a more sustainable and transformative support.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Let's listen to the question first, and then I'll return to you, Maya.
Yeah, thank you. I have a comment, but it's a comment intended to encourage a response. And it's a comment on the issue as to whether principles are rules and or ideals. With regard to your comment as rules, I would agree enshrining them as such may not be constructive, but they're much more than an ideal. They are really a pragmatic framework to manage the perceptions of the belligerent parties to the conflict. And it's not really a matter of laying down the line or laying down the rules as to what you can do. It's not even a matter of declaring yourself as principled. It is a challenge of convincing the belligerent parties that you are principled. It is their opinion, their perception that is important, and then that can allow you to gain maximum access. So what I would argue is compromising on the principles undermines your ability to negotiate access. A quick example from my experience as working with ECHO in Nigeria is that the non-state armed groups, the insurgents, consider us as collaborators with the government. As such, we are legitimate targets. The government, at any suggestion that we would like to operate in areas controlled by the non-state armed groups, don't trust us and consider that as abetting the enemy. So we're caught in the middle. We have not, used this concept to its opportunity, and therefore I think actually they are a very pragmatic tool in gaining access. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for digging deeper into this topic. Marzia, I'm really curious to hear what you think, and hereafter I'll give the mic to Maya.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for raising that. I see principles as ideals in the sense that they need to be contextualized. So it needs to be really clarified what let's say, what impartiality looks like in practice. With the challenge of getting needs assessment, how do we make sure that we really do the right targeting? You're building indeed on the principle of neutrality and the question of perceptions. I agree, it's absolutely important. I think they have even more programmatic reach when you look at it, for example, the relationship between impartiality and independence. In the sense that for me, using independence and neutrality really allows to manage bias, which is also the ultimate aim of the principle of impartiality. So they are really powerful programmatic framework that can be used. I think it becomes really counterproductive if they're seen as an either or. So if they're used to becoming a polarizing force, and so you become either principled or unprincipled, and that's where we saw it wasn't helpful in Yemen. And it's really the idea of acknowledging the trade-offs that is important, and being able to do that. And I think, yes, for neutrality, what we saw in the research is that there is a tendency to look at the short term, and so not necessarily considering the longer term. And I think for neutrality, that's important, because if the dynamics of the conflict shift, it's also quite clear that that may be compromising future access negotiations, depending on who then becomes the power in control. So I don't think we're saying different things. I think I was just trying to clarify that it's important to make sure they don't become a polarizing force, but rather a unifying one, and they remain that way.
Maya, I think you wanted to respond.
Yeah, just going back to the previous question about the EU and visiting Yemen. I mean, I think it's actually important that international actors do visit Yemen and to engage and engaging and talking with local authorities. I mean, I don't think it necessarily has to imply recognition, especially when you're talking about humanitarian issues, life-saving issues. I mean, these are local authorities who are largely isolated from the rest of the world. They are not exposed to the international community, apart from us humanitarians who are inside the country, because there's a lack of embassies, hardly any donors are present, and so on. And so I think the more they're exposed to messaging from the rest of the world, the better it can be. And it's really important that you engage directly with them, especially when the issues are hard, because although the humanitarian community inside the country is doing its best, advocacy is often difficult. And you have to be really courageous, and it really helps when advocacy also comes from outside the country and is conveyed directly to authorities.
Fatima, can I turn to you for another question, if I may? We've been talking mainly so far about the principles or rules. I will not get into that very difficult discussion that the international community and international responders have to apply. What are some of the principles that you as a local organization apply as to when to engage and when not to engage?
Sorry, do you mean with the authorities, right?
Come again?
With the local with partners, or you mean with the national?
When do you decide to engage with the local authority or any other actor, really? What are the principles that you apply?
Yeah, from our experience, we conduct our monthly meeting with members and partners. But actually, recently, we noticed that some partners keep silent and they don't sometimes feel comfortable to share their intervention and challenges. So then we develop
when you're saying partners now, are you talking about local partners as well?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Go on.
Yeah. So then we just developed like new structure for Yemen from GBVUR strategy. So like we have separate meeting from South and North, and we have the meeting like for North members and for South members. This is very helpful for our partners. They start to share their intervention, challenges, and so on. And also we have like conference protection meeting. This is for all members and partners with the local authorities. But in this meeting, for example, we never engage some authorities. It's like for local, international, and UN. So this new structure we developed because we noticed recently that it's difficult to have like one meeting with South and North members and partners. I mean, local organization. So this is why we developed our new strategy for GBVUR to support our partners and members in the field.
Thanks.
Over.
A quick follow-up. Do you ever feel curtailed in your freedom to move and strategize because of the funding that you receive, and how do you deal with that?
Sometimes we face challenge with the authorities. For example, they think that we keep like giving the more fund for South, for example, and it's the opposite. So here you have to engage that. We support both South and North for the most vulnerable people in all Yemen. So we keep like doing advocacy that we are here to support all members or partners, especially for the local organization. From my experience, I noticed that authorities, even South and North, especially North, they are close to a local organization more than international and UN. So like they feel more trust with the local NGOs.
Thank you very much for giving us some insights from the field. We'll have the gentleman over there, and then I'll move to the front. Yes.
Hi, thank you. Myrno from DRC. I'm interested in the panel's reflections if we are able to be better at being more open with our principles, the compromises we have to make to lead to common positions, which could inform collective red lines, and recognizing that many governments, and same in Yemen, subnational authorities may have different opinions about what those red lines are and what are our opportunities to negotiate with them for the best potential outcome. So in theory, if we have common red lines, but recognizing that a government is not necessarily one position, particularly when we go into working in subnational levels. I'm interested in your reflections on how do we coordinate or collectively negotiate on those common positions and red lines at a subnational level for the best potential outcome at that subnational level.
Is the question clear to the members of the panel? Excellent, thanks so much. Carl, would you like to respond to that one?
No, but I think...
No, but I will.
But a reflection, I'm thinking more about Afghanistan now, but where I think, it was necessary to put down some clear red lines when it came to this latest rules on women in humanitarian work. At the same time, we've taken a pragmatic approach to work where we can, including in sectors and in provinces where possible. And our hope is, of course, that that's going to put pressure on those provinces where it's not possible, and those sectors where it's not possible, the people will be looking over their shoulder and telling their leaders, well, you know, if it's done in province X, we want this to happen here as well. So I think that can be an approach also, you know, applied elsewhere, that you set down some serious red lines when necessary, but you implement them in a pragmatic way, including to put pressure on those and provide incentives for others to follow.
Thanks, Carl, for responding despite not wanting to respond.
Yes, thank you. Patrice Lenormand from ECHO, dealing with Yemen. It's a reaction to the comments of our friend from NRC, because she highlighting an extremely sensitive issue. The senior official meeting Carl mentioned will take place in May, and we will have the preparatory session in Amman in May. We sit after and we discuss how we put that in the preparation. We address this very painful issue on a formal way, on an informal way, and very happy to work on that, because I think you really underline the pain in the process. Let's work on it together. Over.
Thank you very much. Are there more comments and questions from the room?
Hi, thank you. My name is Kendra. I work for the Aga Khan Foundation. So we're not present in Yemen, but we are heavily present in Afghanistan and have never ceased our operations there. So we've dealt a lot with questions around access lately, as you can imagine. And I want to bring it back down a little bit more to the local level, because you said one of the big issues around access isn't geography. It's actually how do you access the most marginalized, even when you have access to a geography. One of the solutions that we found most helpful, among a myriad, is working through local actors, whether they're CSOs or actually like community groups. And they can actually be some of the best tools, I hate to use the word tools, but for access. They will negotiate with the local authorities at the community level or at the district level on our behalf, because they want those programs in their communities. Have you had similar experience with that in Yemen? Asking both our local partner and the panelists in the room. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think there was a hand somewhere here. Yes?
Hello, my name is Caroline. Touching upon what Mr. Carl mentioned about a very serious and complicated thing, which is bureaucratization and a bureaucratic process, and also considering the needs that Fatima mentioned concerning the need for more technical and expert staff support, security risks and safety measures, as well as a stronger complementarity. I would like to ask, what kind of measures can the international community of states and organizations, namely the UN and the EU, put in place in order to avoid and tackle this bureaucratic process, which can be frustrating for the local humanitarian actors?
Excellent, thank you so much. Who wishes to respond to that final question? Fatima, any recommendations from your end? How can we...
Yeah.
Yes, go for it.
Okay, actually, I can notice from our experience that the most important things that we notice, local organization, they don't have voice during the policy strategies and even decision making. This is why we advocate donors or international community to support us on this point.
So it's really involving the local actors in the very design as well as the decision making generally, which will hopefully automatically lead to better, I don't want to use the word, bureaucratic rules. Thanks.
Thank you.
Maya, there was a question from someone who has experience with Afghanistan. Allow me to take that as an opportunity to ask you this. There's a lot of work that you've done outside of Yemen. What are some of the lessons that you can take from trying to approach things in a principled manner in Yemen to other places in the world?
I mean, every operation has its specificities. I would say that Yemen is one of the more complex ones. And I'd say one of the key things is that especially at critical moments like what we're seeing at the moment in Yemen, it is actually time to come together for a strategic discussions. Humanitarians, and by that I would say that local actors are actually among the most important humanitarians, and actually I'm really pleased that the humanitarian country team has recently increased its membership of national NGOs, including women-led NGOs, because local voices are so important to hear. So it's important that that the NGO community, both local and international, that the UN and actually donors come together to have this kind of strategic discussion at critical moments on where to go from now. And I think Yemen has probably reached that point at this stage.
Carl. That's not a question from your end. Okay. Still, I have another question for you, Carl. Imagine we fail to have a principled approach in Yemen. What happens then? What do we do?
Well, we won't give up. I think we have seen that with joint efforts we can push and make progress and have improved operating environment. And as I said before, I think the approach then would be to work where we can, in the sectors we can, and in the provinces that we can. I mean, there is no doubt we would not abandon Yemen because it's challenging. We would just redouble efforts to make a difference. But I think we need to be careful, of course, because it's clear that RAW actors are watching each other. Some of the practices seen in Syria has been replicated in Yemen, and we're now seeing that also in Afghanistan. So I think we need to be aware as well that what we do in one place can have implications elsewhere, and so that we need to be principled, we need to work together, but we shouldn't give up. Will never be a time where we give up, but rather the bigger the challenge is, the more that we need to invest in our efforts to confront them.
Thank you, Carl. I think these are excellent concluding remarks from your end. Marzia, what would be your concluding remarks?
Thank you. I think for me is indeed considering, sort of building on what Carl was saying, considering that the outcome of that, of giving up, would be basically leaving hundreds of thousands of people without assistance. And I think it's always keeping that in mind, and I think for me that's also the starting point of the research, is the idea that the better outcome for individuals as a group is really better assistance and protection to the people of Yemen. And I think if we can keep that in the back of our minds, I think that can also help drive some of the conversations forward, not necessarily just in terms of failure or success, but who are we really doing this for?
Thank you. Maya, your last words.
Well, thank you for putting Yemen on the agenda. I would say don't forget Yemen. So many competing priorities, stretched resources. But despite the challenges, we can address if we stay united. And we have a better chance of upholding principles if we are united. Resources also provide us with leverage, and so less resources means less leverage, and so it's really important that the resourcing for Yemen keeps up to date. And as much as resources are important, we also very much depend on the international community for your advocacy support and your moral support. Also be conscious of the new emerging areas of work. It's not only humanitarian assistance in emergencies. During the truce last year, we saw such an upsurge of interest in displaced people wanting to go home and trying to find their own solution to displacement. So let's help these people to keep hope, and just remember that the people of Yemen, no matter what the difficulties that we face, they need us at this moment.
Just double checking, Carl, you want the floor this time.
I have been speaking, you don't know that, but we have a screen here that shows a green or a red light. I've been speaking to the red light all along. I don't know if that's been, that I'm not making sense or if it's too boring or maybe not optimistic enough. But I wanted, because you posed me kind of a negative question, I wanted really to end off on a more positive note, both on the humanitarian side. I think, what I've seen from my visit in Yemen is that there are impressive humanitarian work that is making a difference, that is effective, that is efficient. We tend to always focus on the problems, the challenges, but there's been fascinating humanitarian work in Yemen. And I want really to highlight that. Also on these challenges, that when we come together, we have made progress. There is improvements in the operating environment, so we should by no means give up and pushing for more. But I think beyond that, really, what we really need to seize now is this opportunity for peace, so that next time we are back discussing here, we're talking about how to promote peace, reconstruction, development, really, and how to untap then this fascinating entrepreneurial spirit of the Yemeni people, which is something that I look forward to be contributing and supporting in the next phase of Yemen. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl. Last words for you, Fatima.
Yes, at the end, maybe I will mention about, as we know, the grand bargain and the Charter for Change commitments have put the fundamental ground for localizing the humanitarian response. And yet we need to work together to set up the mechanism that support achieving the localization. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fatima. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank all of you for your presence and your excellent questions. And join me in thanking Carl Schouw, Maya Amaratunga, Marzia Montemurro, and Fatima Sharafuddin. I wish you and the people of Yemen the best of luck.